Welcome to the deep dive. You guys asked for it. A deep dive into the world of anxiety disorders.
So many people experience it.
Yeah. And I'm excited to explore this, complex landscape with you. We're talking panic attacks, phobias, generalized anxiety.
Even PTSD.
Yeah, even the impact of trauma with PTSD.
Yeah.
So we're covering a lot of ground here.
It's fascinating
Yeah.
how much this impacts all of our lives.
Right.
And yet it's often so misunderstood.
Exactly.
We want to unpack not just the definitions, but like the mechanisms behind it.
Yeah, the underlying mechanisms, how it manifests differently,
Yes.
and, ultimately why it matters to you, the listener.
Yes, absolutely.
Completely. And speaking of, ancient theories about anxiety, did you know that the ancient Greeks believed that hysteria stemmed from a wandering womb?
Oh, wow. Really?
Really?
It seems absurd now.
It's crazy.
Yeah, but it shows how much our understanding has evolved.
Yeah, how far we've come.
Right.
Exactly.
So to start, let's clarify the difference between anxiety and fear. Fear is that immediate heart-pounding response to a real present danger.
Right.
But anxiety, on the other hand, is about anticipated threats.
So, like, if a bear is chasing you, that's fear.
Exactly.
But if you're worried about a presentation next week,
Yes.
and, like, your heart is racing, palms are sweating, that's anxiety.
Precisely.
Okay.
Your body reacts as if the threat is happening right now,
Even if it's weeks away.
even if it's weeks or months away.
Oh, wow. That's a crazy mind-body connection.
Right.
It's like our bodies are, like, time travelers,
Yes,
experiencing future stress in the present.
that's a great way to put it.
But wait, didn't you say that some anxiety is actually helpful?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
A little anxiety keeps us alert.
Right.
It motivates us to prepare.
Yeah.
It can help us avoid danger.
Okay.
It's really when it becomes excessive, persistent, and starts interfering with your life.
Oh, okay. So it's like a spectrum. A little anxiety is like a helpful nudge,
Yes.
but too much is like a constant siren
Yeah.
blaring in your head.
A perfect analogy.
Okay.
And that brings us to panic attacks,
Ooh.
which are kind of on the extreme end of that spectrum.
Yeah, all right.
Imagine a sudden surge of intense fear,
Yeah.
your heart pounding, feeling like you're choking,
Oh, wow.
maybe even chest pain.
That sounds terrifying.
It is.
No wonder people, think they're having a heart attack.
Yeah, it can feel very similar.
Right. Because our sources mention, dizziness, trembling, sweating,
Right.
even a feeling of unreality.
Yes.
Like 13 symptoms in total.
It's a lot.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, the impact goes beyond the attack itself.
Of course.
Right. Take Maya, for example. She had a panic attack on a crowded train.
Oh, wow.
And now the fear of another attack, especially in a situation where escape is difficult, has led to agoraphobia.
Right.
So agoraphobia being the fear of open spaces or crowded places.
That's right. Yes.
Right. So Maya might start avoiding crowded places altogether.
Absolutely.
Her world shrinking because of that fear.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle, right?
Oh, wow.
The fear of fear. Each attack reinforces the anxiety about the next one.
It's like being trapped in a mental maze.
Yes.
Where every path seems to lead back to that same overwhelming panic.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's scary.
Speaking of fear, let's move on to phobias.
Yeah.
We all have dislikes.
Right.
But when does a dislike become a full-blown phobia?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I'm terrified of spiders, but I manage to function, I mean, I don't think I'd go like full Indiana Jones and swing over a pit of spiders.
But yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It becomes a phobia when the fear is persistent, out of proportion to the actual danger,
Okay.
and leads to significant distress and avoidance.
So it starts to really impact your life.
Yes.
Okay.
Take Kalu, for example, the fisherman who was terrified of crocodiles.
Wait, a fisherman afraid of crocodiles? That's pretty ironic.
It is, but even though crocodiles were rare in his fishing area,
Oh, wow.
Kalu was so terrified
Yeah.
he couldn't work,
Oh, no.
which impacted his livelihood and his family.
That's heartbreaking. His fear, while, irrational, has such a real impact on his life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, why are we more prone to phobias of things like snakes, spiders, heights,
Right.
than, say, books or flowers?
That's true. Why is that?
Right.
Is it something primal?
It might be.
Like hardwired into our brains from our ancestors?
See,
Like maybe spiders were a bigger threat back in, caveman days.
That's the thinking.
Yeah.
It's called the preparedness theory.
Oh, okay.
It suggests that we might be predisposed to fear things
Yeah.
that posed a threat to our ancestors' survival.
Interesting.
Makes sense, right?
It does.
Our ancient fears still linger,
Right.
sometimes manifesting as phobias.
Wow. So those old survival instincts are still influencing us today.
It seems so.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Okay. On to generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD.
Yes.
This one's about worrying about, everything.
Or pretty much.
Okay.
Imagine constant worries,
Yeah.
difficulty controlling them.
Right.
What if scenarios playing on a loop in your head?
Yeah. I know people like that. Always anticipating the worst, even when things are going well.
Exactly.
Exhausting.
It is.
Yeah. And our sources mention fatigue, muscle tension, sleep problems, difficulty concentrating.
Absolutely.
That's a lot.
GAD is about excessive anxiety over many things. It can affect every aspect of your life.
Right.
As we see with Fatima.
Okay.
Her worries escalated with every stage of her life.
Yeah.
School, marriage, her children's safety.
It's never ending.
It can be very pervasive.
And it often starts in the teens and is more common in women.
Yes, that's what the research suggests.
Okay.
And it can be tricky to treat.
Oh, really?
Directly confronting the worries can backfire. So therapy focuses more on managing the anxiety
Okay.
rather than eliminating the worries altogether.
So telling someone with GAD to just relax is probably not helpful.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's a complex interplay of factors.
Mm-hmm.
And therapy helps them develop coping strategies tailored to their specific anxieties.
Okay, that makes sense. Next up, OCD. It feels like this term gets thrown around a lot, oh, I'm so OCD about keeping my desk clean. But clinical OCD is a whole different ballgame, right?
Absolutely. It's more than just liking things a certain way. It involves intrusive, unwanted thoughts that cause significant distress.
Right.
And compulsions,
Okay.
which are rigid, rule-bound behaviors aimed at preventing something bad from happening.
Oh, so the obsessions are the thoughts.
Yes.
And the compulsions are the actions.
Precisely.
Okay. So, if I can't stop thinking about germs, that's the obsession.
Yes.
And washing my hands repeatedly is the compulsion.
Exactly.
Oh, what?
We all get annoying songs stuck in our heads.
Yep.
But imagine if you couldn't escape those intrusive thoughts
Right.
and felt compelled to perform rituals to ease the anxiety.
Wow. Okay.
That's the world of OCD.
Our case study, Raj, had contamination obsessions.
Oh, right.
He washed his hands constantly, following specific rituals. It consumed hours of his day, affecting his work, his relationships.
Yeah.
Really sad.
His story highlights the concept of thought-action fusion.
Okay. What's that?
It's the belief that even thinking about something bad is equivalent to doing it.
Wow.
So in Raj's case, even thinking about germs was equivalent to being contaminated.
Oh, wow. So his thoughts held so much power over him.
Yes.
It makes you realize how debilitating OCD can be.
It is.
Okay. Maybe we should shift gears to our final topic, which is a bit heavier, trauma and PTSD.
Okay.
This is about the long-term effects of experiencing events that shatter our sense of safety. Not just the immediate shock,
Right.
but the enduring impact. So PTSD is about more than just being shaken up after something bad happens. It's about how that experience continues to affect you long after the event itself.
Precisely.
Okay.
PTSD is characterized by intrusive memories,
Okay.
avoidance of things that trigger those memories, negative thoughts and feelings, and hyperarousal.
What's hyperarousal?
Things like being easily startled or having trouble sleeping.
Oh, okay. It's almost like being stuck in a time warp,
Yes.
reliving that trauma over and over.
It can feel that way.
And it can stem from different kinds of trauma, right?
Absolutely.
Our sources mention combat, natural disasters, accidents, even personal threats. Like we read about Thiramal, who survived the tsunami,
Yes.
Majid, who escaped a fire, and Asim, who was in a horrific car crash.
Each story highlights the different ways trauma can manifest and the lasting impact it can have.
Right.
And tragically, some survivors even experience survivors' guilt,
Oh, yeah.
feeling that they shouldn't be okay when others weren't.
Right.
It's a heavy burden to carry.
It's really sad. Yes.
It's incredible how much our understanding of anxiety has shifted, right? We've gone from blaming wandering wombs to exploring the intricate workings of the brain.
It's amazing, isn't it? Really highlights the importance of scientific inquiry and how much we still have to learn. Speaking of brains, remember how we talked about anxiety being linked to perceived threats?
Right.
Well, let's zoom in on what's happening at the neural level.
Okay, neuroscience time. I'm ready to dive into the brain.
Well, imagine the amygdala, an almond-shaped structure deep in the brain, as a vigilant guard constantly scanning for danger.
Okay.
When it perceives a threat, real or imagined, it triggers the fight or flight response.
So the amygdala is like the alarm system, and the fight or flight response is the siren blaring.
Exactly. This response sends a surge of hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, causing your heart to race, your breath to quicken, your muscles to tense.
Oh, no wonder anxiety can feel so physically intense.
Right.
It's like our bodies are prepping for a battle that might not even be happening. That's a great way to put it. But there's another important player, the hippocampus.
Okay.
You see, the hippocampus is all about memory and context. It compares current situations to past experiences.
So if you had a panic attack in a crowded elevator before, your hippocampus might trigger that memory the next time you step into an elevator,
Exactly.
even if it's perfectly safe.
You got it. It's like your brain is saying, hey, remember that time you felt terrified in here? Better be on high alert.
Wow. So past experiences, especially traumatic ones, can really influence our anxiety levels. Makes sense why therapy can be so effective.
Exactly. Therapy can help reframe those memories, challenge those negative thought patterns, and provide tools to manage anxiety in those triggering situations.
Okay. Brain regions, check. What about those chemical messengers, the neurotransmitters?
Yes,
I've heard GABA is important for anxiety.
you're right. Think of GABA as the brain's calming agent. It helps slow down neural activity, acting like a brake pedal on those racing thoughts.
So if someone has low GABA levels, their anxiety might be higher because that braking system isn't working effectively.
That's the current thinking. And research suggests other neurotransmitters, like serotonin and norepinephrine, are also involved in this intricate dance of anxiety.
Wow, so it's not just one thing, it's this whole symphony of brain regions, neurotransmitters, and past experiences all playing together.
And to add another layer of complexity, we have genetics to consider.
You mean whether someone is predisposed to anxiety?
Exactly.
Like if it runs in their family?
Precisely. Research suggests a genetic component, meaning some people might be born with a nervous system that's more sensitive to stress.
So it's nature and nurture. Our genes lay the groundwork, but life experiences shape how those genes express themselves.
Exactly. It's like a recipe with specific ingredients, but the final dish depends on how you combine and cook them.
Right.
And this leads us to the fascinating aspect of how anxiety manifests differently in each individual.
Right. We've covered a range of disorders, from panic attacks to phobias to GAD, even PTSD. But even within each disorder, people's experiences are unique.
Absolutely. Two people diagnosed with GAD might have completely different worries and coping mechanisms.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Each person's anxiety has its own flavor, its own set of triggers and responses.
Exactly. Understanding this uniqueness is key to tailoring effective treatment approaches,
Right.
whether it's therapy, medication, or lifestyle changes.
Speaking of treatment, what are some of the main approaches used for anxiety disorders? I know people always talk about therapy, but what does that actually look like?
One of the most effective is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It helps people identify and challenge those unhelpful thoughts that fuel their anxiety.
So if someone's constantly worrying about failing a test, CBT would help them examine the evidence for that worry,
Exactly.
explore alternative outcomes, and develop more balanced thinking.
Precisely. It's like retraining your brain to look at situations from a more realistic and less catastrophic perspective. And CDT also focuses on changing behaviors that contribute to anxiety.
So for someone with social anxiety who avoids parties, CBT might encourage them to gradually expose themselves to social situations,
Exactly.
building their confidence over time.
It's about breaking those avoidance patterns that often keep anxiety alive and well.
Right.
And for phobias and PTSD, exposure therapy is often used.
Exposure therapy sounds intense.
It can be.
Is that about confronting your fears head on?
It is, but in a safe and controlled environment. For example, someone with arachnophobia might start by looking at pictures of spiders, then videos, and eventually real spiders, all while learning coping mechanisms to manage their anxiety.
It's like slowly dipping your toes into the water instead of jumping into the deep end.
A great analogy. The idea is to gradually desensitize the fear response, and in some cases, medications are used in conjunction with therapy.
Okay. Let's talk meds. What kind of medications are we talking about?
Antidepressants, believe it or not, can be effective for anxiety disorders, as some types work on the same brain chemicals involved in both conditions.
So there's some overlap in how these conditions work at the neurotransmitter level.
That's right. And then there are anti-anxiety medications, like benzodiazepines, which can be helpful for short-term relief of anxiety symptoms.
But I've heard those can be addictive.
Right? They can be, which is why they're usually prescribed for short periods and under close medical supervision. It's all about finding the right balance between therapy, medication, and lifestyle changes.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about finding the right combination of tools that work for each individual.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that recovery from anxiety is a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, setbacks, and breakthroughs along the way.
Yeah. Our sources mention that sometimes people with anxiety disorders develop unhealthy coping mechanisms like substance abuse as a way of dealing with the distress.
That's unfortunately true. But it's important to recognize those behaviors as a way of trying to manage anxiety, even if they ultimately make things worse. Therapy can help people develop healthier coping skills that address the underlying anxiety rather than masking it.
And what about the role of social support in recovery?
Oh, that's huge.
We often underestimate the power of connection, don't we?
We do. A supportive network of friends, family, or even a support group can make a world of difference. Feeling understood and connected reduces isolation and shame, and it empowers people to seek help.
So reaching out is not a sign of weakness.
Not at all.
It's a sign of strength and self-awareness.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that you don't have to go through this alone. There's a whole community of people who understand and want to help.
This deep dive has been such a journey. We've explored so many facets of anxiety, from its biological underpinnings to its impact on our lives and relationships.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? But we're not done yet. There's still so much to explore.
It's amazing how much we've learned about anxiety, right? From ancient theories to the latest neuroscience. It's a whole new world.
It is, and we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most fascinating aspects of anxiety are the subtle ways it shows up in our lives, almost like a chameleon blending into the background.
Oh, I like that. Like a chameleon. So what are some of those hidden signs of anxiety we might be missing?
Well, think about procrastination.
All right.
We often label it as laziness,
Right.
but it can actually be a clever disguise for anxiety. It's a way of avoiding tasks that trigger those uncomfortable feelings.
Oh, I totally get that. Putting off writing that report or making that phone call because the thought of it just sends your anxiety skyrocketing.
Exactly. It's a temporary escape, but the anxiety just builds and builds until you have no choice but to face it.
It's like trying to outrun a shadow, You can run as fast as you can, but it's always right behind you. So if we catch ourselves procrastinating, it might be a good time to pause and ask, is anxiety at play here?
Absolutely. And here's another one. Perfectionism.
Okay.
We often admire those who strive for excellence.
Right.
But when it's driven by fear, that's when it becomes a problem.
So it's not about the joy of doing something well, it's about the fear of making a mistake or being judged.
Exactly. And this can be paralyzing. People with anxiety might avoid tasks altogether if they don't think they can achieve that impossible standard of perfection.
Yeah, it's like setting the bar so high that you can never quite reach it. And then there's that constant pressure, that inner critic whispering, you're not good enough.
And the physical symptoms can be sneaky too.
Okay.
Headaches, digestive problems, muscle tension, fatigue, all with no obvious medical explanation.
Wow.
These can be signs that anxiety is taking a toll on your body.
So it's like our bodies are trying to tell us something. Like, hey, pay attention. There's a lot of stress here.
Exactly. But we might be so focused on the physical discomfort that we miss the emotional root of the problem.
This is making me realize that anxiety can be a bit of a shapeshifter.
It is.
It can wear so many different masks.
It certainly can.
Yeah.
And it's not just about our individual experience.
Right.
Anxiety can also cast a shadow over our relationships.
Oh, that's a good point. Because when you're in the grip of anxiety, it's harder to be fully present with others, to communicate effectively, to be open and vulnerable.
You've hit the nail on the head. Anxiety can lead to misunderstandings, conflict avoidance, even difficulty with intimacy.
It's like anxiety throws up all these walls.
It does.
These barriers to connection.
It does. But the good news is that these walls can be torn down.
Okay, so what can people do if they're recognizing these patterns in themselves or their relationships? Where do they even begin?
Well, awareness is always the first step.
Okay.
Acknowledge that anxiety might be playing a role.
Right.
And then start to explore ways to manage it. We've talked about therapy, medication, and lifestyle changes like exercise, sleep, and mindfulness.
I'm really intrigued by the idea of mindfulness. Is that about, like, learning to observe those anxious thoughts without getting swept away by them?
Exactly. It's about creating some space between you and your anxiety,
Right.
realizing that you are not your thoughts.
Right.
Mindfulness techniques like mindful breathing or body scan meditations can be incredibly helpful.
So when you feel that anxiety wave rising, you can kind of pause, take a few deep breaths, and ride it out without letting it crash over you.
That's a great way to put it. And it's about finding those anchors that ground you,
Okay.
whether it's spending time in nature, listening to music, or connecting with loved ones.
It's like building a toolkit of coping strategies, knowing that you have resources to draw upon when anxiety strikes.
And remember, you don't have to go through this alone. Reaching out to a therapist or confiding in a trusted friend or family member can make a world of difference. Support is key.
This deep dive has been such a journey. We've explored so many facets of anxiety, from its biological underpinnings to its impact on our lives and relationships.
And the most important message we want to leave you with is this. Anxiety is treatable.
Right.
Recovery is possible.
That's good.
With the right support and a willingness to explore different approaches, you can break free from the grip of anxiety and reclaim your life.
That's so powerful. And I think our listener has a lot to chew on, a lot to ponder. What final thought would you like to leave them with?
In a world that often feels overwhelming and unpredictable, remember this. You have the power to choose how you respond to anxiety. You can learn to manage those anxious thoughts and feelings, and you can build a life that feels safe, meaningful, and fulfilling.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll bring this deep dive into the world of anxiety to a close. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and